There were no gifts, no phone calls, and absolutely no messages for the sixth straight birthday. I sat alone in my apartment, staring at a silent phone. Then, seeking a simple distraction, I opened social media and saw it. My sister stood grinning in front of a brand new bow-wrapped luxury car. Her caption read, "Early birthday present. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for always supporting my dreams." That single image did more than break my heart. It snapped the last remaining thread of my patience. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace. My name is Valerie and I am 33 years old. I live in Chicago in a penthouse apartment that looks out over the glittering skyline of the city. I built a highly successful cybersecurity and venture capital firm from absolutely nothing. By all external measures, I have made it. My life is secure, my career is thriving, and I have achieved the kind of independence most people only dream about. Yet, as the clock on my kitchen wall quietly ticked toward midnight, none of that corporate success mattered. It was exactly 11:45 at night on my birthday, and the silence in my home was deafening. For the past 6 years, my birthday has been a recurring exercise in disappointment. When the clock strikes midnight, a small, stubborn part of my inner child always hopes that things will be different. I sit on my expensive leather sofa surrounded by the physical proof of my hard work, and I wait. I watch the screen of my phone, willing it to light up with a familiar name. Just a simple text message. 2 words. Happy birthday. That is all it would take to mend the fractured pieces of my heart. But the screen always remains dark. The silence stretches out, filling the room until it feels heavy and suffocating. Being successful does not shield you from the fundamental human desire to be loved by your parents. I spend my days negotiating corporate deals, securing digital infrastructures, and leading a team of brilliant minds. I am respected in boardrooms and feared by competitors. But on this one night, every year, I am just a daughter waiting for a sign that she matters. I poured myself a glass of water, deciding against the wine I had set out earlier. The city lights outside my windows felt cold and distant. Millions of people lived in the buildings around me, celebrating milestones with their families. I was completely isolated in my ivory tower, confronting the painful reality that my biological family had once again chosen to erase me from their calendar. At 11:48, I finally accepted defeat. Another year had passed, and the streak of silence remained unbroken. I unlocked my phone, intending to clear my notifications and go to sleep. I checked my work email out of habit, archiving newsletters and flagging updates from my international teams. But my mind was too restless for sleep. The sting of rejection was a physical ache in my chest, a tight knot that made it difficult to breathe naturally. Seeking a mindless distraction from my own thoughts, I opened social media. I just wanted to look at travel photos or architecture, anything to pull me out of my current reality. The algorithm, however, had a different plan. The very first image that loaded at the top of my feed was a fresh post from my 29-year-old sister Sloane. I stopped scrolling immediately. My breath caught in my throat as my eyes processed the image. Sloane was standing in the driveway of our parents' house, the same driveway I had not been permitted to park in for years. She was wearing a designer dress, her hair perfectly styled, striking a practiced influencer-style pose. But it was not her outfit that made my stomach drop. It was the massive piece of machinery situated right behind her. It was a brand new Range Rover gleaming under the driveway lights. The vehicle was spotless, pristine, and undeniably expensive. I know cars, and I knew instantly that this specific model easily cost upwards of $90,000. Adorning the hood of this massive luxury SUV was a giant glossy red bow. It looked like a still frame from a ridiculous holiday television commercial. The sheer extravagance of the display was staggering. But the visual of the car was nothing compared to the caption Sloane had typed out below it. I read the words slowly, my mind refusing to accept the sheer cruelty of the timing. The caption read, "Early birthday present. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for always supporting my dreams." I stared at the screen, letting those words sink into my brain. Early birthday present. Sloane's birthday was not for another 2 months. Yet my parents, Vivian and Richard, had gone out of their way to purchase her a $90,000 luxury vehicle as an early celebration. They had orchestrated this massive, expensive surprise on the exact week of my actual birthday. The math was simple and devastating. They did not forget what day it was. They knew perfectly well that it was my birthday week. They simply chose to channel all of their celebratory energy and a massive amount of their finances into the daughter they actually preferred. They chose to reward Sloane for simply existing, while completely ignoring the daughter who was sitting alone in a city hours away. The blatant disrespect radiated from the screen, slapping me across the face harder than any physical blow ever could. I zoomed in on the photo. I looked at the bright, triumphant smile on Sloane's face. She looked so incredibly proud of herself, so secure in her position as the golden child. That house in the background represented decades of conditional love, unfair comparisons, and emotional neglect. For 6 years, I had held on to a quiet, pathetic hope that they would eventually realize my worth. I had convinced myself that if I just became successful enough, they would finally reach out and claim me as their own and make me feel like part of the family again. But this photograph shattered that illusion completely and permanently. My mother and father had literally purchased a $90,000 monument to their favoritism. They had wrapped it in a red bow and allowed my sister to broadcast it to the world on the very night I was sitting in silence. The profound sadness weighing down my chest rapidly evaporated. It burned away, replaced by a sudden intense heat. It was not just anger, it was absolute icy clarity regarding my place in their lives. The baseline conflict of my life had always been a desperate plea for their attention. I had played the role of the patient scapegoat for far too long. Watching Sloane flaunt her unearned prize while I sat ignored on my birthday pushed me straight over the edge. I realized in that profound moment that I no longer wanted their phone call. I no longer wanted their birthday wishes. I stared at the photograph of the Range Rover one last time, feeling the final bond between us snap. I closed the application, the glowing screen fading to black. The reflection of my own face appeared in the dark glass of the phone. I looked calm. I looked like the CEO everyone else saw during the day. But beneath the surface, my mind was already pulling me backward. The image of that massive red bow refused to leave my thoughts. It was not just a car. It was a $90,000 symbol of everything my parents had denied me. I set the phone face down on the marble countertop. The cold surface grounded me, but it could not stop the rush of memories that the Range Rover had triggered. My thoughts snapped back to a humid August afternoon 15 years ago. I was 18 years old, sitting at the long oak dining table in the very same house that served as the backdrop for Sloane's Instagram post. I had placed a stack of student loan applications on the polished wood. I only needed a co-signer. I was not asking them to pay my tuition. I was not asking for an allowance or a free ride. I just needed their signatures so the bank would approve the modest loan required to cover my first year of tuition. I had earned a partial scholarship, but it was not enough to cross the finish line. My father, Richard, had barely glanced at the papers before pushing them back across the table. His expression was set in that familiar mask of corporate disappointment. He adjusted his expensive watch and looked at me as if I were a bad investment pitch. "Computer science is a hobby, Valerie," he had said, his voice flat and dismissive. "We are not throwing our financial weight behind a useless degree. If you want to play around with coding, you can do that on your own time." I remembered the desperate panic rising in my chest. I tried to explain the growth of the tech industry, the potential for cybersecurity, the solid career path I had researched for months. I tried to show him the data, but my mother Vivian had interrupted me before I could even finish my sentence. She was arranging a vase of fresh lilies, not even looking at me while she dismantled my future. "If you wanted our help, you should have chosen the pre-law track like we discussed," Vivian said, carefully snipping a stem. "We do not finance teenage rebellions. You want to make your own choices, then you can pay for them yourself. We are not going to co-sign a loan that you will inevitably default on when you realize computers are a dead end." They did not just refuse to help, they guaranteed my failure, or at least they thought they did. I remembered walking out of that house with my unsigned papers, the realization settling heavily on my young shoulders. I was entirely on my own. The next 4 years were a blur of sheer exhaustion. I took a job wiping down tables at a campus coffee shop at 4 in the morning. I worked the late-night reception desk at the university library. On weekends, I tutored underclassmen in mathematics. I worked 3 jobs just to keep a roof over my head and pay my tuition installments, all while carrying a full course load and maintaining top grades. I survived on cheap noodles, donated textbooks, and 4 hours of sleep a night. I never asked them for a single dime. The memory shifted fast-forwarding 4 years. I was 22. I had just graduated with honors and secured an entry-level position at a tech firm. I needed reliable transportation to commute to the office. I had saved every spare dollar, hoarding my tips from the coffee shop in a shoebox under my bed. I remembered the day I walked onto a used car lot and handed over a stack of crumpled bills for a 10-year-old rusted sedan. The air conditioning was broken, the upholstery was torn, and the engine rattled when I pushed it past 60 miles an hour. But it was mine. I had bought it with my own blood, sweat, and tears. I had felt a brief, fragile sense of pride driving that beat-up car off the lot. That pride evaporated 2 weeks later. The memory of that specific day hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was early June. Sloane was graduating from high school. She had barely scraped by with a C average. She had spent her senior year partying, skipping classes, and treating her teachers with the same arrogant disdain my parents showed service workers. I had driven my rattling, unair-conditioned sedan to our parents' house for her graduation party, sweating through my only nice blouse. When I pulled up to the curb, I saw it. A brand-new imported luxury coupe sitting perfectly in the center of the driveway. It was sleek silver and smelled of expensive leather. It was adorned with a giant ribbon much like the one I had just seen on my phone screen tonight. I remembered standing on the edge of the lawn watching my parents pop a bottle of champagne. They were cheering, hugging Sloane, telling her how incredibly proud they were of her achievement. Her achievement was simply showing up to enough classes to not get expelled. I had approached my mother near the catering tent, trying to keep my voice steady. I pointed to the car and asked how they could justify such an extravagant purchase when they had refused to merely co-sign a basic educational loan for me. Vivian had looked at me with an expression of mild annoyance, adjusting her pearl necklace. Sloane needs a reliable, safe car for college, Valerie. It is important that she makes a good impression when she arrives on campus. You understand? You have always been so scrappy. You do fine with your little used car. Sloane just requires a different standard. Scrappy. That was her word for neglected. That was her justification for forcing me to fight for basic survival while handing my sister a life of luxury on a silver platter. Standing in my Chicago penthouse now, the contrast between those two memories fueled a fire in my chest that burned away any lingering sadness. It was not just about the money. It was never about the money. It was about what the money represented. It represented belief. It represented support. It represented love. They believed in Sloane so much that they bought her a luxury vehicle for barely graduating high school. They believed in her so much that they just bought her a $90,000 SUV for a birthday that was still 2 months away. They had looked at me, a driven, intelligent daughter who just wanted an education, and deemed me a bad investment. They had actively bet against me. I began pacing the length of my kitchen, my bare feet silent against the cold marble floor. The rapid succession of these memories clarified everything. For years I had carried a heavy burden of guilt. I had wondered if I was too distant, if I should make more of an effort to visit, if I was somehow responsible for the coldness in our relationship. But the image of that Range Rover, overlaid with the memory of my rusty sedan and my unsigned loan documents, absolved me of that guilt completely. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the city again. I had built a venture capital firm that managed hundreds of millions of dollars. I had proven my father spectacularly wrong. Computer science was not a hobby. It was the foundation of an empire, my empire. My parents did not know the extent of my success. They thought I was just a mid-level tech employee, making a comfortable but unremarkable living. Whenever we spoke on our rare, obligatory holiday calls, I kept my answers vague. I let them believe whatever they wanted to believe, because sharing my success with them felt like handing over a piece of myself that they had not earned. The anger I felt now was not the hot, chaotic rage of a teenager. It was cold, precise, and absolute. They had not changed. In over a decade, they had not evolved, reflected, or grown. They were still the exact same people who had casually discarded my future while funding my sister's vanity. I turned my back on the window and looked at my quiet, empty apartment. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt clean. It felt like a freshly sanitized system purged of malicious code. I had survived their neglect, and I had thrived in spite of their active opposition. I did not need them. I never really did. The decision I had made moments ago felt more solid than the foundation of the building I stood in. The string of memories had severed the final fraying cord of familial obligation. I was ready to move forward completely unburdened by the ghosts of that suburban driveway. I walked back across the kitchen, the cool marble floor chilling the bare soles of my feet. My phone still lay face down on the island where I had left it. For a moment, I just stared at the sleek black case. That small device was the only tether left connecting me to a family that had spent a lifetime making sure I knew I did not belong. I reached out and flipped it over. The screen illuminated instantly, bringing Sloane and her absurdly large red bow right back into my line of sight. I did not feel the sting of rejection anymore. The tears that used to threaten my composure on these lonely birthdays were completely gone. In their place was a profound, unshakable calm. I pressed the buttons on the side of my phone, capturing a screenshot of Sloane's post. The screen flashed, immortalizing the caption praising my parents for their unwavering support. I closed the social media application and opened my text messages. I scrolled past conversations with my chief financial officer, my lead developers, and my friends. Way down at the bottom, buried under weeks of irrelevance, was the family group chat. It had been dormant on my end for months. The thread was essentially a digital shrine dedicated exclusively to Sloane. I scrolled up slightly, viewing the history of our interactions. There were pictures of Sloane's overpriced brunches, her complaints about minor inconveniences at her fake marketing job, and my parents responding with excessive sympathy and praise. My own sparse updates about work milestones were routinely met with silence or a quick thumbs-up reaction before the conversation pivoted right back to my sister. The blatant inequality was right there in black and white text stretching back for years. I opened the chat. The cursor blinked steadily in the empty text box. In the past, I might have drafted a long, emotional paragraph. I would have poured my heart out, explaining how much their continuous neglect hurt me. I would have pointed out the hypocrisy of buying a $90,000 car for someone who contributed nothing while ignoring the daughter who built an empire. I would have given them all the ammunition they needed to call me dramatic, jealous, and overly sensitive. I refused to give them that satisfaction. They did not deserve my vulnerability. They did not deserve an explanation. I selected the screenshot from my photo library and attached it to the chat. I watched the image load into the message bubble. Then I tapped the text field and typed 4 simple words. Message received. We are done. I did not use exclamation points. I did not add any emojis to soften the blow. I read the words one more time to ensure they conveyed exactly what I intended. It was a formal resignation from the role of the family scapegoat. I pressed send. A small swoosh sounded in the quiet apartment, and the message appeared in the thread. A tiny gray text beneath the bubble confirmed it was delivered. I knew my mother was likely awake. She was a notorious night owl who spent hours scrolling through her tablet in bed. My father usually had his phone volume turned all the way up on his nightstand. Sloane was probably still actively checking her post to see how many likes her new car had accumulated. They would all see it within moments. I stared at the screen for exactly 3 seconds. I saw a small cluster of gray dots, appear next to my mother's name, indicating she was already typing a response. I did not care what she had to say. I did not care if it was an excuse, a reprimand, or a frantic attempt to gaslight me into believing I was overreacting. I tapped the information icon at the top of the chat. I selected my mother's profile first. Without a single moment of hesitation, I pressed the block caller button. A prompt popped up asking me to confirm the action. I confirmed it. I backed out and selected my father's profile. I pressed block and confirmed. I did the exact same thing for Sloan. The satisfying finality of those taps felt like setting down a heavy weight I had been carrying since childhood. But I knew blocking their phone numbers was not enough. My mother was incredibly resourceful when she wanted to play the victim. If she could not reach me by text, she would try other avenues to guilt-trip me. I exited my messages and opened my phone settings. I navigated to my medical and emergency contact information. For years, Vivian and Richard had been listed there, a default choice, made out of societal expectation rather than actual trust. I deleted their names, wiped their phone numbers from the fields, and saved the changes. I realized in that moment that if I were ever in a true emergency, they were the last people I would want by my hospital bed anyway. I replaced them with the name of my closest friend and business partner. Next, I opened my social media applications. I searched for Sloane's profile, the one that had started this entire chain of events. I blocked her account. I blocked my mother's account. I blocked my father's account. I opened professional networking sites and severed connections there as well. I scrubbed my digital life clean of their presence, ensuring there were no backdoors left open for their toxicity to seep through. The entire process took less than 5 minutes. 5 minutes to dismantle a lifetime of chasing approval. When I was finished, I set the phone back down on the marble counter. It was completely silent now. It would not ring with their incoming excuses. It would not buzz with Sloane's demands for an apology. I was entirely unreachable to them. I walked over to the custom wine fridge built into my kitchen cabinetry. Earlier in the evening, I had set out a bottle of expensive red wine, intending to pour a glass to celebrate my birthday, but the heavy silence had ruined my appetite for it. Now, however, there was a genuine reason to celebrate. I pulled a crystal glass from the upper shelf. I uncorked the bottle, the rich aroma of oak and dark berries filling the space between us. I poured a generous measure, the deep red liquid swirling smoothly against the glass. I picked up the wine and walked back into the main living area. I settled onto the plush leather sofa, tucking my feet beneath me. I held the glass up to the light of the city skyline pouring through the windows. The reflection of the Chicago skyscrapers shimmered in the dark wine. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The taste was complex and perfect, warming my throat and settling comfortably in my stomach. The silence in my apartment no longer felt oppressive or lonely. It felt luxurious. It was the sound of absolute peace. I leaned my head back against the cushions and closed my eyes, letting the quiet wash over me. I had spent so much energy trying to prove my value to people who were determined to misunderstand me. That energy belonged to me now. I had given myself the greatest birthday gift imaginable. I had finally given myself permission to let them go. The cord was cut, the bridge was burned, and I was entirely free. They were gone. I had finally severed the toxic tie. The next 3 days passed with a level of tranquility I had not experienced in over a decade. Waking up on the morning after my birthday, I anticipated a slight twinge of regret, or perhaps a spike of anxiety. I expected to feel the phantom weight of my phone vibrating with angry demands or passive-aggressive guilt trips, but there was nothing. The digital walls I had erected held firm. My blocked lists acted as an impenetrable fortress against their chaos. I poured my energy into my firm, closing a major venture capital deal on Tuesday and finalizing a cybersecurity infrastructure contract for a massive healthcare network on Wednesday. My professional life was thriving, and for the first time, my personal life matched its stability. I moved through my penthouse with a newfound lightness. I drank my morning coffee while watching the sun rise over Lake Michigan, feeling utterly secure in the independent, wealthy life I had built with my own two hands. I genuinely assumed the trash had simply taken itself out. I figured my message had been so stark, so undeniably final, that even their monumental egos could not find a way to twist it into an invitation for debate. They had Sloane and her luxury car. They had their perfectly curated suburban image. They did not need me to play the scapegoat anymore, so they had finally let me go. Or so I thought. Thursday evening arrived with a quiet, comforting rhythm. I had just wrapped up a conference call with my development team in Tokyo and was preparing to log off for the night. I walked into my kitchen planning to make a light dinner and read a book I had been neglecting. The apartment was silent, save for the low, soothing hum of the city traffic drifting up from the streets below. I opened the refrigerator feeling completely at peace. Then a harsh electronic buzz shattered the quiet. The sound originated from the secure intercom panel mounted near my front door. It was a sharp grating noise that instantly set my nerves on edge. My building has strict security protocols. The concierge at the front desk handles all deliveries and unannounced guests, screening them meticulously before granting anyone access to the private elevators. No one makes it to the penthouse level without a verified appointment. I frowned, setting down the ingredients I had gathered for dinner. I walked slowly across the hardwood floor toward the entryway. I assumed the concierge was simply calling up to alert me about a late package, or perhaps a misdirected food delivery intended for a neighbor. I reached the panel and tapped the screen to activate the live video feed from the lobby. The high-definition camera flickered on, revealing the polished marble and brass fixtures of the building entrance. But it was not the polite face of the night concierge waiting on the screen. It was my mother. I stared at the monitor, my breath catching in my throat. Vivian stood in the center of the camera frame, and she looked entirely unrecognizable. My mother was a woman who never left her house without perfect hair, a flawless face of makeup, and designer clothes tailored to project an image of effortless wealth. The woman on the screen was a chaotic, frantic mess. Her hair was disheveled strands falling loose from what was meant to be a neat style. Her mascara was smeared down her cheeks in dark, jagged streaks. She was clutching her luxury handbag so tightly, her knuckles were white and she was sobbing uncontrollably. I watched her shoulders heave as she cried. She was speaking frantically to the concierge, who looked extremely uncomfortable with the display of raw emotion occurring in his immaculate lobby. I could not hear the audio yet, but the sheer panic radiating from her body language was undeniable. She kept pointing upward, begging him to let her through. She looked like a woman whose entire world had just collapsed. I stood frozen in my entryway, watching the silent movie play out on the small monitor. My mind raced, trying to process the sudden appearance of the woman I had just permanently exiled from my life. Why was she here? How had she even known where to find me? I had moved to this specific building over 2 years ago and deliberately kept the address vague during our rare holiday phone calls. She must have spent the last 3 days digging through public business records or harassing my former colleagues to track down my exact location. I reached out and pressed the audio button on the panel. The sound of her hysterical sobbing immediately filled my quiet apartment. "Please, you have to let me go up," Vivian cried, her voice cracking with desperation. "She is my daughter. You do not understand. I have to talk to her right now. It is an absolute emergency. Please call her again. Please." I did not press the button to speak. I simply watched her, my initial shock slowly transforming into a cynical, hardened realization. I had seen my mother deploy tears before. I had watched her use emotional outbursts to manipulate my father, to guilt-trip service workers, and to force me into submission when I was a teenager. This level of hysteria was certainly a new extreme, but the underlying tactic felt entirely familiar. I assumed I knew exactly what was happening. I figured the reality of my final message had finally penetrated her thick skull. She had realized that I actually blocked her, that I had severed all avenues of communication, and that she could no longer access her favorite emotional punching bag. I assumed she was standing in my lobby, staging a massive dramatic performance to force a reconciliation. She was going to offer a fake tearful apology about forgetting my birthday. She would claim she had been so stressed, so overwhelmed, and that the car for Sloane was just a huge misunderstanding. She would cry, beg for forgiveness, and attempt to smooth things over so the family dynamic could return to the comfortable, toxic status quo she preferred. The concierge looked up at the security camera, clearly hoping I would intervene and relieve him of the weeping woman disrupting the peace of his lobby. "Ms. Valerie," he said, his voice polite but strained over the intercom. "Your mother is here. She states it is an extreme family emergency. Would you like me to contact building security to escort her out, or shall I grant her access to the elevator?" My finger hovered over the deny access button. The smart, safe choice was to tell him to call security. The rational decision was to maintain the boundary I had established 3 days ago, to turn off the monitor, walk back into my kitchen, and let the concierge handle the garbage removal. I owed her absolutely nothing. But a cold, stubborn part of me hesitated. If I sent her away now, she would just keep coming back. She would show up at my corporate office and cause a scene in front of my employees. She would continue playing the role of the desperate, loving mother, trying to reach her cruel, distant daughter. I realized that if I wanted this to end permanently, I needed to shut it down face to face. I needed to look her straight in the eye, listen to her manufactured, manipulative apology, and reject it with absolute certainty. I needed to strip away the final illusion that she had any power left over me. Against my better judgment, I pressed the button to activate the microphone. "Send her up," I said, keeping my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Thank you, Ms. Valerie," the concierge replied, sounding immensely relieved. I watched the screen as he directed my mother toward the private, secure elevator bank. She practically ran toward the doors, her shoulders still shaking with sobs. The video feed cut out as she stepped inside the carriage. I let go of the intercom panel and took a slow, deep breath. I walked back into the living room and stood near the center of the space, waiting. The elevator in my building opens directly into a private foyer just outside my front door. I calculated that I had roughly 60 seconds before she arrived. I did not feel afraid. I did not feel the old familiar anxiety that used to twist my stomach whenever I was forced to interact with her. I felt like a fortress. I mentally prepared myself for the incoming barrage of fake tears, the gaslighting, the desperate attempts to rewrite the narrative of my birthday. I braced myself for the ultimate manipulation tactic. I told myself to stand tall, to keep my expression blank, and to remember the $90,000 car that started this entire cascade. The soft melodic chime of the private elevator echoed through the wall, signaling her arrival. I heard the heavy mechanical doors slide open. I heard the frantic clicking sound of her expensive heels against the foyer tiles. Then came the sound of a fist pounding desperately against my heavy oak front door. "Valerie!" Vivian cried from the other side of the wood, her voice muffled but frantic. "Valerie, please open the door, please!" I walked forward, my posture rigid, my resolve absolute. I reached out, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the door open fully, expecting to dismantle her rehearsed apology piece by piece. My mother stumbled across the threshold the second the door swung inward. She did not pause. She did not offer a greeting. She practically collided with my right shoulder as she forcefully pushed her way past me into the brightly lit foyer, bringing with her the sharp scent of expensive floral perfume and sheer panic. The rehearsed speech I had prepared, the cold dismantling of her maternal failures, died in my throat. I closed the door slowly, turning to watch her pace across my living room. Up close, her disheveled state was even more jarring than it had appeared on the security monitor. Her designer trench coat was buttoned unevenly. One of her diamond earrings was missing. She was hyperventilating, taking short, jagged gasps of air as she frantically looked around my penthouse as if expecting the walls to close in on her. She did not look at me with the eyes of a guilty mother seeking forgiveness. She looked at me with the wild, desperate eyes of a cornered animal. There was absolutely no apology coming. The realization settled over me like a cold blanket. I had assumed her tears were a manipulative performance meant to smooth over her 6 years of blatant neglect and the disrespectful social media post. I was wrong. She had not come to my home to mend our fractured relationship. She had come because she needed something. "Valerie, you have to do something!" she gasped, finally stopping in the middle of my living room. "You have to fix this right now." I stood near the entryway, keeping a deliberate distance between us. "Fix what?" I asked, my voice flat and completely devoid of the sympathy she was clearly hunting for. Vivian waved her hands in the air, the heavy gold bracelets on her wrists clanking together. "Everything is frozen. The bank accounts, the credit lines, the corporate cards. I went to pay for dinner an hour ago and my card was declined. I tried another one, and the machine rejected it. I logged into the mobile application, and every single account balance is locked. They locked us out completely." She began pacing again, her heels clicking rapidly against the hardwood floor. "It is a disaster, a complete disaster. I tried calling the emergency customer service line, but they put me on hold for 20 minutes, and then some automated system told me I had to visit a branch during normal business hours." Normal business hours. Do they not understand who we are? Do they not know how much capital we keep in those accounts? I watched her meltdown with clinical detachment. My parents owned a boutique real estate brokerage. They managed significant amounts of money. A total lock on all personal and corporate accounts was not a simple clerical error. It was the kind of extreme action a financial institution takes when there is a massive red flag. But that was not my problem. I crossed my arms over my chest. "Sounds like a banking issue. I fail to see why you are standing in my living room in the middle of the night instead of waiting for your branch to open tomorrow morning." Vivian let out a high hysterical sob. "Because they are taking the car, Valerie. The repo men are at Sloane's apartment right now." I stared at her, my mind immediately flashing back to the image I had seen on my phone just days ago. The pristine silver luxury SUV with the massive red bow, the $90,000 slap in the face. "Are you talking about that obscenely expensive new car you just bought her for her upcoming birthday?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly level. Vivian nodded frantically, her breath catching. "Yes, the vehicle. Sloane called me 10 minutes after my card was declined at the restaurant." She was screaming. Two men with a tow truck backed into her designated parking spot. They hitched up the car and told her the financing had fallen through. They said the bank pulled the funding and ordered an immediate repossession. Sloane was humiliated. Her neighbors were watching. You know how she hates being embarrassed. She was crying so hard she could barely breathe. "You have to stop them." The sheer ridiculous absurdity of her demand hung in the air. "Stop them," how I asked. "I do not work for your dealership. I do not work for your bank." Vivian rushed toward me, closing the distance until she was standing just inches away. "You do computer bank stuff," she pleaded, waving her hand as if my career as a venture capitalist and cybersecurity expert was some sort of dark magic I could use to manipulate financial institutions. "You run that tech company. You know how to bypass these systems. You know how to get into the mainframes. Just log in and authorize the release. Unfreeze the account so the loan processes. Tell them the funds are there. I need you to fix this before Sloane has a complete mental breakdown." I looked down at my mother. The entitlement was staggering. After 6 years of ignoring my existence, after disdaining my computer science degree as a useless hobby, she was now standing in my home, demanding I commit federal wire fraud to save her golden child from public embarrassment. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for Sloane. In fact, a dark, cynical part of me found the immediate repossession of that vanity purchase profoundly poetic. But my professional instincts were overriding my personal vindictiveness. Financial institutions do not issue immediate repossession orders and total account freezes because of a simple missed payment or a minor processing error. They execute those aggressive maneuvers when they suspect severe actionable fraud. I took a step back, maintaining my boundary. "I am not hacking into a bank for you," I stated clearly. "And banks do not freeze all associated assets over a delayed car loan. Something else is going on." Vivian shook her head violently, her eyes wide with panic. "No, it is just a mistake. It has to be a mistake. We have the paperwork. We were approved. I did exactly what the finance manager told me to do." It was during this frantic denial that I finally noticed what she was clutching in her left hand. Pressed tightly against her designer coat was a crumpled, thick manila folder. My eyes locked onto the folder. The pieces of the puzzle were not fitting together. My parents ran a real estate brokerage. They had access to significant capital. Even if they were experiencing a bad quarter, they should have had more than enough liquid assets to secure an auto loan or at least prevent a total account freeze. I looked from the crumpled folder back to my mother's terrified face. The panic radiating from her was too extreme for a simple bank error. She was terrified of something specific. "Hand me the folder," I commanded, my voice dropping into the authoritative tone I used in boardrooms. Vivian clutched the papers tighter against her chest, physically recoiling from my demand. "Hand me the physical paperwork," I repeated, stepping closer and holding out my hand. "You came into my personal sanctuary in the middle of the night, demanding my immediate professional help with a massive, inexplicable financial crisis. I am not lifting a single finger, making a single phone call, or offering a shred of advice until I see exactly what you signed to get that car." Vivian stared at my extended hand for a long, agonizing moment. Her chest heaved with shallow breaths, her eyes darting toward the heavy front door, as if calculating the odds of making a successful escape. She knew exactly what was inside that folder, and she knew that handing it over would strip away the very last layer of her carefully constructed facade. But she also knew she was trapped. The car was actively being repossessed. Her accounts were locked. She had nowhere else to turn. With a trembling hand, she slowly extended her arm and surrendered the crumpled manila folder. I took it from her grasp without a single word. I turned my back on her and walked over to the massive marble island in the center of my kitchen. I reached out and tapped the dimmer switch, bringing the bright overhead pendant lights to their maximum intensity. The kitchen flooded with harsh, unforgiving white light, transforming the warm space into something resembling an interrogation room. I placed the folder flat on the cold marble surface and deliberately smoothed out the creased edges. I could hear my mother pacing nervously behind me, her expensive heels clicking a frantic, erratic rhythm against the hardwood floor. I tuned out the noise. I opened the cover and began to read. The first few pages were standard dealership fluff, glossy printouts showcasing the vehicle specifications, the upgraded leather interior packages, the extended warranty options that only a desperate salesperson would push. I bypassed those, digging straight into the hard financial documentation. I pulled out the primary credit application and spread it out under the bright light. My eyes scanned the meticulously typed columns, seeking the foundation of the transaction. What I found immediately halted my breath. The numbers printed in the income and asset verification sections were staggeringly low. I knew my parents ran a boutique real estate brokerage, and I knew the housing market experienced cyclical downturns, but the figures on this document painted a picture of absolute financial devastation. Their listed liquid capital was practically non-existent. Their debt-to-income ratio was pushed to a catastrophic limit, heavily burdened by maxed-out revolving credit lines and multiple second mortgages on properties I assumed they owned outright. According to this dealership application, Richard and Vivian were barely keeping their heads above water. They did not have the credit score, the liquid cash, or the verifiable income to qualify for a used sedan, let alone a $90,000 luxury SUV. The dealership's automated underwriting system would have rejected them in a fraction of a second. There was no mathematical reality where a reputable financial institution would hand them the keys to that Range Rover based on these abysmal numbers. Yet the car had been sitting in Sloane's designated parking spot just a few hours ago. The loan had cleared the initial approval stage somehow. If the primary applicants were unqualified, there was only one way the dealership finance manager could push the paperwork through to funding. They needed a co-signer. They needed a guarantor with an impeccable credit history, substantial verifiable assets, and a flawless financial background to offset the massive risk my parents presented. I turned to the secondary financing agreement, fully expecting to see the name of one of my father's wealthy business associates or a gullible relative who had been talked into taking on the liability. I scanned the top of the page. My vision narrowed. The noise of my mother pacing behind me completely faded away. Printed clearly in the box designated for the primary guarantor was my own name, Valerie Ann Sterling. I gripped the edge of the marble island, my knuckles turning white. I read the line again silently, hoping my eyes were deceiving me in the late hour. They were not. Right below my name was my full social security number, typed out with brazen accuracy. Next to that was an address. It was not the address of my current Chicago penthouse. It was an outdated address from a tiny rundown apartment I had rented nearly a decade ago during my early college years, the exact same era when they had flatly refused to co-sign my modest student loans. They had weaponized my old personal data to secure funding for the very sister they had prioritized over my basic education. My gaze drifted slowly down to the bottom of the guarantor page. There, sitting starkly on the signature line, was a deliberate, calculated forgery of my handwriting. It was a decent attempt at mimicking the looping cursive I used when I was younger, but to my trained eye, the hesitations and unnatural stops in the ink were glaringly obvious. The reality washed over me in a wave of freezing, terrifying clarity. My parents had not just bought a car they could not afford. They had not simply made a poor financial decision to spoil their favorite daughter. They had committed egregious, premeditated identity theft. They stole my name, my social security number, and my pristine financial reputation to fraudulently acquire a $90,000 vehicle. The early birthday present they proudly celebrated online was nothing more than a massive illegal liability anchored directly to my neck. The audacity was so extreme, so entirely devoid of basic human morality, that it temporarily paralyzed my ability to speak. I stood perfectly still under the harsh pendant lights, staring at the fraudulent signature. The anger that had been simmering inside me all evening vanished completely. It was replaced by a dangerous absolute zero void. This was no longer a matter of toxic family dynamics or emotional neglect. This was a severe federal crime. I gathered the papers, tapped the edges against the marble to align them, and slowly turned around to face the woman who brought me into this world. Vivian had stopped pacing. She stood near the velvet armchair, wringing her hands, watching my face for any sign of a reaction. She looked like a child caught in a lie, hoping a quick apology would make the punishment disappear. "You forged my signature," I stated. I did not yell. I did not shake. My voice came out in a low, terrifyingly calm register that caused my mother to flinch. "Valerie, please, you have to understand the pressure we were under," she stammered, stepping forward with her hands raised in a pleading gesture. The dealership was running a special promotion, and Sloane had her heart set on that exact model. "Your father and I were just slightly short on our debt-to-income ratio. We merely used your old profile to bridge the gap. We were going to make the monthly payments ourselves. You never would have known about the clerical workaround. It was just a temporary family favor." I stared at her, marveling at her ability to categorize felony identity theft as a clerical workaround. "You triggered a massive fraud alert," I explained slowly, watching the blood drain completely from her face. "My current financial profiles are monitored by institutional wealth algorithms. When a $90,000 auto loan originated using a decade-old address and a suspicious signature, my security system did not just flag it. It initiated a catastrophic lockdown to protect my assets. That is why your associated accounts are frozen. That is why the dealership panicked and ordered the repossession. The bank knows what you did, Vivian. You did not make a simple mistake. You crossed a line you can never uncross." Vivian stood frozen. The reality of my words seemed to finally penetrate the thick layer of entitlement she wore like armor. The performative tears instantly vanished. The frantic excuses evaporated. She looked at me, realizing that her usual tactics were completely ineffective against the concrete evidence I held in my hands. The dealership documents were a physical anchor holding her to the truth. She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing visibly. "Valerie, please," Vivian whispered, dropping her voice to a harsh, desperate rasp. "You have to listen to me. I know you are angry, but you cannot let them take that car." Sloane is sitting on the sidewalk right now crying her eyes out while her entire apartment complex watches a tow truck hitch up her vehicle. You have the money. Just call the bank right now. Tell them you authorize the transaction retroactively. I swear to you, Richard and I will make the monthly payments. We will pay you back every single cent. Just do not let my daughter endure this public embarrassment. I stared at her, genuinely marveling at her twisted priorities. She had just committed felony identity theft against me, risking my financial empire. Yet her absolute paramount focus was saving Sloane from the mild social discomfort of losing a luxury vehicle she had not earned. There was no apology for stealing my identity. There was only a desperate demand that I cover up the crime. I did not argue with her. I did not waste my breath trying to explain the legal depravity of her request. Words had never worked on my mother. She only understood actions. I turned away and walked calmly back to the marble island where my phone was resting. Vivian let out a long, shuddering sigh of relief. She genuinely believed she had won. She thought my silence meant compliance. She assumed I was going to fold under the pressure and fix the mess she had created. I picked up the phone. I unlocked the screen and opened my contacts. I tapped into the directory for my corporate wealth management team. I selected the dedicated executive fraud hotline. Vivian stepped closer, a tentative, hopeful smile beginning to form on her lips. "Thank you, Valerie," she breathed with artificial gratitude. "You are doing the right thing for the family. Sloane will be so relieved." I did not look at her. I pressed the call button. Instead of holding the device to my ear, I tapped the speakerphone icon. I set the phone down flat on the marble counter right next to the forged loan documents. A crisp, professional ringtone echoed through the silent kitchen. Vivian stopped moving. Her smile faltered. She stared at the phone, a flicker of confusion crossing her features. The phone rang a second time. Executive Fraud Division. "This is Agent Miller speaking. How can I possibly assist you tonight?" The deep voice booming from the small speaker was sharp, alert, and entirely official. Vivian gasped softly. The sound was incredibly sharp and panicked. She lunged forward with surprising speed, reaching out desperately to snatch the mobile phone off the cold marble counter. I stepped smoothly into her path, blocking her with my body. She collided with my shoulder and stumbled backward, her eyes wide with mounting terror. "Yes, Agent Miller?" I said, keeping my voice steady over the speaker. "This is Valerie Ann Sterling. I am calling to formally report a fraudulent transaction tied to my primary Social Security number and to authorize a full criminal investigation." Ms. Sterling, Agent Miller responded immediately, the typing of a keyboard audible in the background. "I see the catastrophic lock on your profiles initiated earlier this evening. We flagged a high-value auto loan origination in Illinois. Can you confirm you did not authorize this purchase?" "I did not authorize this purchase," I stated clearly, maintaining unbroken eye contact with my mother. "I have obtained physical copies of the dealership paperwork. My signature has been forged. The perpetrators utilized an outdated residential address to bypass initial verification screens." "Valerie, stop it!" Vivian hissed, her voice a frantic, desperate whisper. She grabbed my arm, her manicured fingernails digging painfully into my skin. "Hang up that phone right now. You are going to ruin everything. Hang it up." I shook her hand off my arm with a violent, forceful jerk. I did not break my gaze. "Ms. Sterling, are you in a safe location?" the agent asked, catching the muffled sounds of the struggle. "I am perfectly safe," I replied calmly. "The individuals who committed the identity theft are my biological parents, Richard and Vivian. They orchestrated the fraudulent loan to purchase a vehicle for my sister. I am officially reporting them for felony identity theft and bank fraud. I want to proceed with full prosecution." "Understood, Ms. Sterling," the agent said, his tone shifting into a deeply serious register. "Since you know the perpetrators, this moves from an internal bank flag to a federal matter. We will be transferring this file to the authorities immediately. We will require you to sign a formal affidavit tomorrow morning, and local law enforcement will be dispatched to collect the forged documents. I will be available at my corporate office at 9 tomorrow morning," I confirmed. "Thank you, Agent Miller." I reached down and tapped the red button, ending the call. The kitchen plunged back into a heavy, suffocating silence. Vivian stared at the dark screen of the phone. Her chest was heaving. Her face had turned an ashen, sickly shade of gray. The reality of what had just occurred was finally crashing down on her. The safety net was gone. The comfortable, wealthy life she had built on a foundation of lies and theft was actively being dismantled. Then the silence broke. Vivian erupted. "You monster!" she screamed, the sound tearing through the penthouse. "You absolute heartless monster! How could you do this? We are your parents. We raised you. You have more money than you could ever possibly spend in a single lifetime, and you are sending us to a federal prison over a stupid car." She began to pace frantically, waving her arms. "You are destroying this family. You are tearing us apart because you are jealous of Sloan. You could have just paid the loan. You could have just let it go. But no, you had to be cruel. You are destroying your own family." I stood perfectly still in the center of the kitchen, letting her scream until her lungs burned. I watched her hurl insults and deflect the blame for her own criminal actions directly onto me. I waited until she ran out of breath and glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I reached down slowly and picked up the forged dealership documents. I tapped them against the counter one last time. "I am not destroying the family, Vivian," I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy whisper. "This family was destroyed 6 birthdays ago, when you made it clear that I was an inconvenience to you. This family was destroyed every time you prioritized Sloan over my basic survival. This family was destroyed the moment you decided my identity was just another asset for you to exploit." I looked her straight in the eyes, refusing to look away from the absolute devastation I had just cemented into place. "I am not destroying anything. I am simply filing the paperwork for a demolition that happened a long time ago." Vivian stared at me for a long time. Her chest heaved with ragged, uneven breaths as she processed the absolute finality of my words. The color remained completely drained from her face, leaving her looking hollow and aged under the bright kitchen lights. She opened her mouth as if to hurl another insult, but nothing came out. The realization that she possessed zero leverage had finally paralyzed her. Without another word, she turned on her heel and practically fled toward the entryway. I listened to the frantic clicking of her shoes against the hardwood floor. The heavy oak front door opened and slammed shut with a resounding thud that echoed through the penthouse. She was gone. The oppressive tension in the room instantly evaporated. I was entirely alone again. I walked over to the marble island, picked up the forged dealership documents, and placed them neatly inside a secure folder. I took the crystal wine glass I had abandoned earlier and poured the contents down the sink. I did not need alcohol to celebrate anymore. The adrenaline coursing through my veins was more than enough. I turned off the harsh pendant lights, plunging the kitchen back into a comforting darkness, and walked to my bedroom. For the first time in my adult life, I fell asleep the moment my head hit the pillow. There was no tossing and turning. There was no lingering anxiety about what my family thought of me. There was only the deep, restful sleep of a woman who had finally reclaimed her own life. The next morning arrived crisp and clear. I dressed in a sharp, tailored charcoal suit, pinning my hair back with absolute precision. I drove to my corporate office downtown, the morning traffic feeling less frustrating than usual. Agent Miller and a local federal liaison were waiting for me in a private conference room on my floor. The meeting was brief, highly professional, and devoid of any emotional theatrics. I handed over the physical manila folder containing the dealership paperwork. The federal agent placed the documents into a clear evidence bag. He slid a formal affidavit across the polished mahogany table. I read every single line, verifying that my account of the identity theft was captured with total accuracy. I picked up the heavy brass pen provided by the agent and signed my name. The ink settling into the paper felt like locking a steel vault. It was official. The fraud was no longer a personal family dispute. It was an active federal investigation. I returned to my office and spent the majority of the day diving into routine operational tasks. I reviewed quarterly projections, approved budget increases for my development team, and analyzed potential acquisitions. By mid-afternoon, I had almost entirely pushed the events of the previous night out of my mind. My office was quiet, bathed in the warm light of the setting sun filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. Then my personal mobile phone chimed softly on my desk. It was a Google Alert notification. I keep several automated alerts active for variations of my name and my company to monitor our digital footprint. I swiped the notification to open the link. The alert directed me to a social media platform. My heart beat steadily unbothered as the page loaded. I assumed it was a standard industry blog mentioning a recent venture capital deal I had brokered. Instead, a video filled my screen. It was Sloane. She was sitting on the floor of what appeared to be her luxury apartment. The staging of the video was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She was wearing an oversized beige knit sweater that looked intentionally frumpy. Her hair was pulled up into a messy bun with just enough loose strands framing her face to make her look distressed. The lighting was soft muted and designed to cast shadows under her eyes. She wore no visible makeup, save for perhaps a subtle tint, to make her skin look pale and washed out. She looked directly into the camera lens with wide, tear-filled eyes. I tapped the screen to unmute the audio. "Hey guys, Sloane," began her voice trembling with manufactured vulnerability. "I do not usually bring my personal life onto this platform. You all know I try to keep things positive and uplifting here. But my family is going through something absolutely devastating right now, and I just need to talk about it because I feel so helpless." She paused, taking a shaky breath and swiping a perfectly timed tear from her cheek. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. "My parents are the most hardworking, loving people in the world," Sloane continued, her voice breaking slightly. "They are getting older and they have sacrificed everything to give me and my sister a good life. Recently, they were trying to help me out with some financing paperwork. It was just a tiny, confusing administrative form. They made a simple clerical error. That is all it was, just a mistake involving some old paperwork." I stared at the screen, my jaw clenching. A simple clerical error. She was actively rebranding felony identity theft and bank fraud as a minor paperwork mix-up. "But my sister Sloane," said, dramatically dropping her gaze to the floor before looking back up with an expression of profound sorrow. "My older sister is a very wealthy tech millionaire. She has more money than she could ever possibly spend. She has always been distant, always been a little greedy, but I never thought she could be this cruel." Instead of just picking up the phone and letting us fix this tiny mistake, she reported our aging parents to the federal authorities. Sloane let out a loud, shuddering sob, covering her mouth with her hands for a moment. "She is trying to send our elderly parents to federal prison over a piece of paper. She froze their bank accounts. She is trying to ruin their business. She is trying to destroy our family, just because she has the money and the power to do it. I am terrified for my parents. Please, if you have ever dealt with a toxic, greedy family member who abuses their power, you know how incredibly isolating this feels." The video ended with her wiping her eyes and staring mournfully into the camera. I checked the metrics beneath the video. It had only been live for 2 hours, but the numbers were skyrocketing. It had already amassed over 400,000 views. The share count was climbing by the second. Sloane had intentionally leveraged her influencer status, weaponizing her dedicated followers to create a digital mob. I scrolled down into the comments section. The vitriol was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of strangers were tearing me apart based entirely on a fictional narrative. They were calling me a corporate monster. They were demanding my company be boycotted. They rallied around the phrase clerical error, fiercely defending my parents as innocent, confused victims of a ruthless billionaire. Sloane had successfully painted me as the ultimate heartless villain. A cold wave of disgust washed over me. I recognized the strategy instantly. Facing an imminent federal investigation, Richard and Vivian knew they had no legal defense. The dealership documents were undeniable proof of their crime. Since they could not fight me in a court of law, they had decided to destroy me in the court of public opinion. They had weaponized their golden child, instructing Sloane to launch a vicious, highly coordinated smear campaign. The goal was obvious. They wanted to generate so much public outrage and social pressure that I would be forced to cave, retract my fraud report, and drop the charges just to save my own professional reputation. I locked my phone and tossed it onto my desk. The sheer audacity of their counterattack was staggering, but I refused to let the panic settle into my chest. I knew the truth. The federal agents knew the truth. A crying influencer with a ring light could not magically erase a forged signature on a legally binding financial document. I gathered my things, locked my office, and drove home, deliberately ignoring the continuous buzzing of my phone in my purse. The true fallout from the video did not hit until the following morning. I woke up, poured my coffee, and opened my laptop at my kitchen island. The digital mob had not just stayed contained within the comment section of Sloane's social media profile. The targeted harassment had spilled over into my professional life. My corporate email inbox was overflowing with notifications. My professional networking profile was blinking with hundreds of unread messages. The flying monkeys had been officially deployed. It was not just angry strangers anymore. The viral video had permeated our extended social circles back in my hometown. Relatives I had not spoken to in a decade, family friends who used to attend my parents' summer barbecues, and old acquaintances from high school were all coming out of the woodwork to attack me. I clicked open an email from my Aunt Patricia. The subject line was simply typed in all capital letters. How could you? I read the body of the text, my eyes scanning the hateful words. I cannot believe the monster you have become, the email read. After everything your mother and father did to put a roof over your head, this is how you repay them. You were always so incredibly jealous of your sister. Trying to send your own mother to jail over a car is sick and twisted. You have all that money, and you are acting like a greedy tyrant. Drop these ridiculous charges immediately before you completely ruin your own soul. I deleted the email. I opened my professional networking platform. A message from a man who used to play golf with my father was sitting at the top of my inbox. I saw Sloane's video. The message stated, "Using your corporate wealth to bully your aging parents over an administrative mistake is pathetic. You should be utterly ashamed of yourself. You need to call the bank and fix this today." Message after message echoed the exact same manipulative talking points. They called me ungrateful. They called me cruel. They accused me of hoarding my wealth and torturing my poor, confused parents. The coordinated social pressure was immense. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of shame designed to make me feel entirely isolated. The strategy was to make the public hatred so unbearable that I would pick up the phone, call Agent Miller, and beg him to stop the investigation, just to make the screaming stop. I sat at my kitchen island reading the hateful messages as my coffee slowly turned cold. My heart pounded against my ribs, but it was not pounding with sadness or intimidation. It was pounding with a deep, focused frustration. They honestly believed this would work. They honestly thought that parading their golden child on the internet and mobilizing a fleet of misinformed relatives would be enough to bully me into submission. They thought I was still the quiet, obedient scapegoat who would fold under the weight of their disapproval. I closed my inbox. I shut down my professional networking tabs. I was not going to release a public statement. I was not going to film a response video defending my actions to a crowd of people who were already fiercely committed to misunderstanding me. Engaging in a public relations battle against a professional victim was a losing game. The internet loves a crying face, and truth rarely travels as fast as a sensational lie. I refused to play their game on their chosen battlefield. I stood up from the kitchen island and walked over to my home office. I closed the heavy double doors and locked them. If Richard and Vivian were desperate enough to commit federal identity theft for a car loan and desperate enough to launch a viral smear campaign to cover it up, they were hiding something massive. Healthy, successful real estate brokerages do not resort to forging signatures to secure an auto loan. There was a glaring discrepancy in their financial reality, and I was going to find out exactly what it was. Instead of defending myself to the flying monkeys, I channeled every single ounce of my frustration into my unique skill set. I am a forensic cybersecurity expert. I have spent my entire career dismantling digital fortresses, auditing complex financial systems, and uncovering hidden assets for venture capital acquisitions. I sat down at my desk and booted up my secondary custom-built secure terminal. The dark screen flickered to life, strings of green code cascading down the monitor as my encrypted servers established a secure connection. I flexed my fingers, hovering over the mechanical keyboard. I typed in the registered business name of my parents' boutique real estate brokerage. I ran a query to pull their state licensing board records, public property tax filings, and registered limited liability company associations. I bypassed the noise of the social media circus and stepped directly into the cold, unforgiving world of digital data. The smear campaign could scream into the void all it wanted. I was going to hunt for the truth in the shadows, and I was going to tear their entire financial existence down to the studs. The first step was isolating the primary target. I leaned forward in my ergonomic chair and brought up the state business registry on my left monitor. I typed in the exact legal name of my parents' boutique real estate brokerage. For years, they had operated under a facade of upscale exclusivity, catering to high-net-worth clients in the suburban housing market. They constantly bragged about their record-breaking sales quarters and their elite clientele. I needed to see the actual foundation beneath that glittering exterior. I pulled their original incorporation documents from the state database. Everything from the early years looked perfectly normal. They had filed their annual reports on time and maintained a clean standing with the regulatory boards. But when I adjusted my search parameters to focus specifically on the last 5 years, the exact time frame when Sloane started flaunting her designer lifestyle, the digital landscape drastically and completely shifted. I opened a specialized financial tracking terminal on my center monitor. As a venture capitalist, I regularly utilize this software to audit the fiscal health of tech startups before greenlighting acquisitions. It aggregated public tax filings, municipal property records, and registered debt obligations into a comprehensive timeline. I ran my parents' names and their primary business identification number through the algorithm. The progress bar loaded steadily across the screen. When the results populated, my office was bathed in the harsh blue light of the data display. I scrolled down the summary page and felt a grim sense of validation. The brokerage was bleeding cash. Their reported commercial revenue had plummeted over 40% in the past 3 years alone. The regional housing market had experienced a slight dip, but nothing severe enough to justify that kind of catastrophic drop. Yet despite the massive decline in legitimate revenue, their personal spending had exponentially increased. I needed to see exactly how they were bridging that enormous financial gap. I pulled up the county property tax database and cross-referenced it with their personal residents. The results showed multiple delinquent tax notices filed over the past 24 months. They were paying the absolute minimum required to avoid foreclosure, waiting until the final possible day before the county initiated legal action. It was the desperate behavior of people living paycheck to paycheck, not the actions of wealthy suburban socialites. I dug into the commercial lease for their downtown office space. According to the municipal civil court records, their landlord had filed 2 separate eviction warnings for non-payment of rent. Both times the balance had been miraculously paid off at the 11th hour via cashier checks. I leaned back in my chair and took a sip of cold coffee. They were moving money around in a frantic, chaotic pattern, just trying to plug the holes in a sinking ship. But where was that emergency cash coming from if their business was failing? I shifted my focus back to the business registry. I started tracing the names of the registered agents associated with their brokerage. That was when I noticed the first anomaly. A secondary limited liability company was registered to the exact same commercial suite as my parents' brokerage. The name of the company was generic and unremarkable. It was listed as a property management consultancy. I pulled the incorporation documents for this new entity. The registered agent was not Richard or Vivian. It was a third-party corporate registered agent service designed specifically to shield the true ownership of the company. That level of anonymity is common in high-level corporate mergers, but completely unnecessary for a small suburban real estate operation unless someone is actively trying to hide assets. I ran a reverse search on the third-party agent and cross-referenced it with the physical address of the brokerage. The system chewed on the data for a few seconds before spitting out a spider web of connections. It was not just one shell company. There were four. Four distinct limited liability companies, all registered to the same address, all utilizing the same anonymous agent service, and all incorporated within months of each other. Right around the time Sloane graduated from college and decided she wanted to be a full-time lifestyle influencer. I opened a digital notepad on my right monitor and began mapping the connections. I tracked the property listings my parents had represented over the past few years. I compared the public sales records with the purchasing entities. A distinct, terrifying pattern emerged from the raw data. My parents were representing clients selling high-value suburban homes. When the houses sold, the closing documents looked standard on the surface. But when I looked closely at the buyer information on several key properties, the purchasing entities were those exact same shell companies. I rubbed my tired eyes, the bright monitors burning my retinas. The clock on my wall indicated it was well past 2 in the morning, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins made sleep impossible. I was completely immersed in the hunt. I pulled up the mortgage records for the properties purchased by the shell companies. The loans were heavily leveraged, utilizing high-interest commercial financing. My parents were essentially acting as both the seller agents and the hidden buyers, artificially inflating property values and taking out massive loans against the homes. They were using the cash generated from those commercial loans to fund their personal lives. It was a reckless, incredibly dangerous financial house of cards. But even that massive influx of debt could not account for the sheer volume of cash they were burning through to maintain the fake influencer persona of Sloane. The math still did not add up. I stood up and paced the length of my home office, my bare feet silent against the hardwood. I was missing a crucial piece of the architecture. Shell companies and leveraged debt could keep a failing business afloat for a little while, but the interest payments alone would eventually crush them. They needed a steady liquid cash flow that did not require credit checks or bank approvals. They needed a source of money they could access immediately and quietly. I walked back to my desk and sat down, staring intensely at the web of connections on my monitors. I needed to look closer at the daily operational transactions of the brokerage itself. I opened a specialized legal database that tracked financial disputes and professional licensing complaints. If they were desperate enough for cash, they might have started cutting corners with their vendors or contractors. I typed the brokerage license number and initiated a search through the State Real Estate Commission portal. I wanted to see if any formal grievances had been lodged against their firm regarding unpaid invoices or delayed commission splits. The search results populated instantly, illuminating the dark office with a stark white glare. There were no contractor disputes and no vendor complaints. Instead, there was a long list of routine administrative audits detailing the handling of client escrow accounts. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as a chilling realization began to crystallize. The Real Estate Commission requires brokers to maintain strict separation between operational funds and client deposits, holding those deposits in heavily regulated escrow accounts. If my parents possessed unrestricted access to those holding accounts, they would theoretically have an endless supply of untraceable cash. I clicked the audit logs, preparing to uncover the ultimate betrayal. The screen refreshed, and a cascading list of compliance reports populated my terminal. Real estate escrow accounts are essentially sacred ground in the financial sector. When a buyer puts down earnest money for a home purchase, those funds are placed into a heavily guarded holding account. The broker acts as a neutral fiduciary, legally obligated to keep that money completely isolated from their own operating expenses until the sale officially closes or falls through. Touching those funds for personal use is not just an ethical violation, it is a severe federal offense. I pulled the routing numbers associated with my parents' primary trust accounts and began a cross-referencing protocol against the shell companies I had identified earlier. My software was designed to track microtransactions and detect obfuscation patterns that traditional banking algorithms often miss. It did not take long for the system to catch a massive, glaring anomaly. A transfer of $45,000 had moved from their main client escrow account into a secondary operating fund on a Tuesday afternoon in late October 3 years ago. The memo line was marked as an administrative vendor payout. Exactly 24 hours later, that identical amount was wired from the operating fund directly into the private checking account of Sloane Sterling. I sat perfectly still in my dark office. My eyes darted between the digital ledger and the date of the transfer. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to Sloane's social media profile, scrolling back through her meticulously curated timeline until I hit October of that specific year. There it was, a glossy, high-definition photograph of my sister posing on a private balcony in Santorini. The caption detailed a spontaneous 2-week luxury retreat to celebrate a major milestone in her influencer career. She had not paid for that vacation with brand deals or sponsorships. She had paid for it with the stolen earnest money of a family trying to buy a house in the Chicago suburbs. I felt a cold knot of disgust tighten in the pit of my stomach as I initiated a macro-level audit of the past 5 years. I commanded the terminal to flag every single outbound transfer from the escrow accounts that matched the routing numbers of my parents' shell companies and Sloane's personal accounts. The terminal hummed, processing thousands of data points. When the final compilation finished rendering on my center monitor, the sheer scale of the theft was breathtaking. It was not an isolated incident of desperation. It was a systematic, highly coordinated pipeline of stolen cash. The spreadsheet stretched out before me, a damning testament to their absolute lack of morality. I began matching the dates of the illegal transfers to the timeline of Sloane's fake luxury persona. A $20,000 wire transfer lined up perfectly with her unboxing video featuring a rare limited edition designer handbag. A $50,000 extraction from a commercial client deposit matched the exact month she signed the lease on her luxury downtown apartment, covering the exorbitant security deposit and a full year of rent paid up front in cash. First-class flights to Paris, expensive cosmetic procedures, lavish dinners at exclusive restaurants, where the tasting menu cost more than my first car. All of it was secretly funded by ruthlessly draining the life savings of innocent clients who trusted my parents with their real estate transactions in full. Vivian and Richard had built a highly sophisticated illusion. They used the newly acquired client deposits to silently replenish the older accounts right before a closing occurred, effectively running a massive real estate Ponzi scheme. As long as the local housing market remained active and new eager clients kept bringing in fresh, earnest money, they could shuffle the funds around and mask the deficit. But the market had recently cooled. The influx of new buyers had slowed down, and the house of cards was finally beginning to buckle under its own weight. That was why their own personal credit was completely maxed out. That was why they were facing delinquent tax notices and eviction warnings on their commercial office space. The well of stolen money was drying up, and they were scrambling to maintain the facade of immense, untouchable wealth. It explained everything about the $90,000 car loan. They did not have the liquid cash left in the escrow accounts to buy the vehicle without triggering a catastrophic default on an upcoming house closing. They needed financing to cover the purchase, but their own credit was entirely ruined by their reckless leveraging. So they had reached out and stolen my identity to bridge the gap. They were perfectly willing to let me shoulder a massive fraudulent debt, just to ensure she never truly faced the reality of her own financial incompetence. The profound sickness of their dynamic washed over me. They were enabling her delusion with stolen money, and she was happily spending it without questioning its origin. I pushed my chair back from my desk and let the total silence of the penthouse fully settle around me. The anger I felt was no longer hot or chaotic. It was cold, refined, focused, and incredibly lethal. I turned back to my mechanical keyboards and began the meticulous process of preservation. This was simply not a situation where a simple screenshot would suffice. I needed irrefutable, cryptographically secure proof that would withstand the scrutiny of a federal prosecutor. I initiated a secure download of the complete and unedited banking ledgers, capturing the raw metadata, the precise IP addresses associated with the fraudulent transfers, the geographic login coordinates, and the digital signatures of the exact users who originally authorized them. I created a master directory on an encrypted external drive. Inside, I built a timeline. I placed the bank statements side by side with the corresponding social media posts from Sloane's account linking the stolen funds to her purchases. I downloaded the property tax records, the eviction notices, and shell company documents. I built a comprehensive map of their entire criminal enterprise, detailing exactly how the money was funneled from innocent buyers into the pockets of my sister. I worked with the steady, detached precision of a surgeon operating on a malignant tumor. I was excising them from society entirely. The sun was beginning to rise over Lake Michigan by the time I finished assembling the dossier. The sky transitioned from deep black to a pale, bruised purple, casting a soft glow across my office. I reviewed the final package one last time. The evidence was absolute. There was no clerical error defense that could explain away 5 years of systematic embezzlement. There was no public relations spin that could make this look like a misunderstanding. They were guilty, and I held the undeniable proof in the palm of my hand. I initiated an encryption protocol on the file, securing it behind a complex alphanumeric password and a biometric lock. I carefully duplicated the drive and stored the backup on an isolated offline server, accessible only through my secure terminal. I pulled the primary drive from the port and held the small metal rectangle in my hand. It was remarkably light for something that carried the power to destroy 3 lives instantly. I leaned back in my chair and watched the quiet city wake up through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The smear campaign was nothing but noise. I held the kill switch and I was going to use it. Later that morning, after securely locking the encrypted drive in my personal wall safe, I received a secondary automated notification on my desktop. Despite my decision to ignore the social media mob, I still maintained passive monitoring protocols on my sister's accounts just to track her movements. The alert indicated that Sloane was broadcasting a live video stream. I clicked the link, letting the broadcast load on my secondary monitor while I sipped a fresh cup of coffee. The stark contrast between the digital reality she was projecting and the financial devastation sitting in my safe was almost dizzying. Sloane was filming from inside a sprawling industrial chic event space located in one of the most expensive gallery districts in downtown Chicago. The cavernous room was bustling with event planners, caterers, and lighting technicians. She spun the camera around to show a massive flower wall being assembled by a team of florists. The wall was composed entirely of imported white roses, featuring a neon sign illuminated in bright pink script. The sign displayed her social media handle, intertwined with the logo of a highly coveted, rapidly expanding beauty company called Aura Botanicals. I watched as she flipped the camera back to her face. She was glowing with manufactured excitement, completely devoid of the tearful, victimized persona she had weaponized just a few days prior. She adjusted her designer jacket and beamed at her thousands of live viewers. She announced that she was officially the new face of Aura Botanicals and was hosting a massive VIP brand partnership launch party that very evening. She told her audience that this exclusive event was proof that you can overcome any negativity and rise above toxic family drama. She specifically mentioned that her parents, who had been through so much unfair stress recently, were helping her coordinate the final details of the celebration. She panned the camera to the left, capturing Vivian and Richard standing near a champagne tower. They were dressed in impeccable evening wear, holding crystal flutes and barking orders at a catering manager as if they owned the entire building. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the scene playing out on my monitor was staggering. My parents were currently facing absolute financial ruin. Their boutique brokerage was a hollow shell entirely propped up by embezzled client escrow funds. They had just committed felony bank fraud to finance a vehicle that was currently sitting in a repossession lot. Yet here they were, boldly masquerading as wealthy suburban socialites, projecting an impenetrable facade of high-class success to an audience of strangers. They were funding this extravagant launch party with the last remaining drops of their stolen cash, desperate to maintain the illusion of their superiority. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and studied the broadcast. Sloane was walking her viewers through the VIP gift bags being arranged on a long mirrored table. She boasted about the premium skincare products, the custom engraved compacts, and the exclusive discounts her followers would receive. She was leveraging the controversy surrounding our family to boost her engagement metrics, spinning the horrific identity theft into a triumphant story of overcoming adversity. She was monetizing the very crime they had committed against me. I minimized the video feed and opened a new browser window, initiating a quick corporate background check on Aura Botanicals. The cosmetics company was indeed a rising star in the beauty industry, known for its clean ingredients and aggressive influencer marketing campaigns. They had recently secured a massive round of funding, allowing them to rapidly expand their market presence and sign high-profile brand ambassadors like Sloane. It was a highly lucrative contract that would have secured my sister a substantial monthly retainer and significant commission bonuses. For a normal influencer, it would be a career-defining achievement. For Sloane, it was a desperate lifeline intended to replace the funds I had cut off when I reported the fraudulent car loan. She believed this cosmetics partnership would legitimize her fake lifestyle and provide the income necessary to keep her afloat. She was completely oblivious to the financial guillotine hanging directly over her head. She had no idea that I held the cryptographic key to her entire destruction, or that her parents were currently standing on the precipice of federal indictment. The afternoon slowly transitioned into evening. I remained at my desk, quietly observing the digital footprint of the launch party as it officially began. Sloane's social media feed became a continuous stream of curated perfection. She posted short, polished video clips of herself posing on the pink carpet, surrounded by other local influencers and minor celebrities. The venue was packed with people dressed in high fashion, sipping signature cocktails, and dancing under expensive lighting installations. Every single post was meticulously designed to project an aura of flawless, untouchable success. She posted a photo standing between Richard and Vivian. My mother was wearing a new diamond necklace, her smile wide and seemingly completely unbothered by the fact that she was actively under federal investigation for identity theft. My father was holding a glass of expensive bourbon, looking perfectly at ease, projecting the image of a proud, highly successful patriarch celebrating his golden child. The caption beneath the family portrait read, "Surrounding myself with the people who truly support me. We are stronger than any clerical error." They were doubling down on their lies, doubling down on the fake narrative they had fed to their flying monkeys, and absolutely reveling in the public validation. They genuinely believed they had outsmarted me. They thought that by hosting this lavish party and ignoring my warnings, they could simply manifest their way out of a felony conviction. They assumed my silence over the past 24 hours was a sign of defeat. They figured I had backed down, intimidated by the social media mob they had unleashed against me. They were celebrating their victory, drinking champagne paid for by stolen escrow funds, completely unaware that I was watching their every single move. I watched a live interview Sloane conducted with a minor local fashion blogger near the venue entrance. The blogger asked how Sloane managed to stay so positive while dealing with such heavy public family drama. Sloane placed a hand over her heart, looking directly into the camera lens with a practiced expression of deep emotional fortitude. She stated that her parents had taught her the true value of resilience and that focusing on building her incredible partnership with Aura Botanicals was her way of rising above the negativity. She smiled radiantly, kissed the interviewer on the cheek, and turned back to the bustling, glamorous launch party event. I closed my laptop, cutting off the live feed of their delusional celebration. The office grew quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the city traffic drifting up from the streets below. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the Chicago skyline. They had set the stage perfectly. They had gathered their entire network, invited the press, and proudly positioned themselves at the very center of the spotlight. They wanted an audience. They desperately wanted the world to see their final victory. I decided it was finally time to give them exactly what they wanted. I walked out of my home office and moved swiftly toward my master bedroom to prepare. I was not going to sit in my penthouse and watch their criminal charade continue for another minute. I walked into my master bedroom and bypassed the section of my closet holding traditional evening gowns. Tonight was not about blending in as a polite socialite. Tonight was about corporate execution. I pulled out a custom-tailored midnight blue pantsuit crafted from heavy Italian silk. The sharp, structured shoulders and crisp lines projected absolute authority. I paired it with a pristine white silk blouse and black stiletto heels that clicked decisively against the hardwood floor. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, severe twist at the nape of my neck, ensuring not a single strand fell out of place. I applied a minimalist layer of makeup, finishing with a bold crimson lipstick that felt like war paint. I did not wear any jewelry save for a heavy platinum watch on my left wrist. I looked into the full-length mirror. I did not look like a grieving daughter or a jealous sister. I looked like a venture capitalist ready to dismantle a faulty acquisition. I grabbed my small leather clutch containing only my phone and my keys and headed out the door. The drive to the Gallery District was surprisingly smooth. The city streets were alive with evening traffic, but my focus remained entirely locked on the destination ahead. I pulled my car up to the valet stand, directly in front of the cavernous event space. A cluster of young attendees stood near the velvet ropes, taking flash photographs and adjusting their elaborate outfits. The pulsing bass of the music reverberated through the thick glass doors of the venue. A pair of imposing security guards flanked the entrance, checking names off a digital tablet. I stepped out of my vehicle, handed my keys to the valet, and walked straight toward the velvet rope with an unwavering stride. "Name," the taller security guard asked, holding up his tablet as I approached the entrance. I did not slow my pace. I looked him directly in the eyes. "I am the majority shareholder for Aura Botanicals," I said, my voice steady and commanding. "I am here to conduct a final review of the brand ambassador setup." The guard hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes scanning my impeccably tailored suit and authoritative demeanor. He did not bother checking his digital list. People who look and speak like I do are rarely questioned at the door. He unclipped the velvet rope and stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter the building. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped into the sensory overload of the launch party. The air was thick with the scent of expensive floral arrangements and the sweet, cloying aroma of cosmetic powders. Pink and white spotlights swept across the exposed brick walls, illuminating the massive promotional banners displaying Sloane's face. The room was packed with hundreds of guests, all holding their phones up to record the meticulously curated spectacle. Waitstaff wove through the crowd, carrying silver trays piled high with miniature appetizers and tall, effervescent cocktails. I navigated my way through the sea of influencers, my dark suit standing out sharply against the pastel cocktail dresses and trendy streetwear dominating the room. I spotted a waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes near the main bar. I smoothly intercepted him, lifting a crystal glass by its slender stem. I took a slow sip. The champagne was dry and perfectly chilled, a stark contrast to the boiling tension slowly building in my chest. I turned my attention toward the center of the expansive room, seeking out my targets. It did not take long to find them. The flower wall I had seen on the live stream was situated against the far wall, flanked by professional lighting rigs and a designated photography crew. Sloane was standing directly in the center, posing flawlessly beside the CEO of Aura Botanicals. She was laughing, tossing her hair over her shoulder, and soaking up the absolute adoration of the surrounding crowd. A few yards away, standing near a raised VIP booth, was my father. Richard was holding court with a group of local business owners, gesturing expansively with a highball glass in his hand. He looked incredibly self-satisfied, completely absorbed in the illusion of his own manufactured success. I stood near a massive structural pillar, partially obscured from the main dance floor, and simply watched him. I took another sip of my champagne, letting the cold liquid settle my nerves. I waited patiently for the inevitable moment, when the grand illusion would finally shatter. It happened almost exactly 3 minutes later. Richard turned away from his active conversation to signal a passing waiter for a drink refill. As his gaze swept casually across the crowded room, his eyes snagged on the dark silhouette of my custom suit. He paused, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He squinted through the flashing pink lights, trying to process the impossible sight standing before him. Then absolute recognition slammed into his features with the force of a physical blow. I saw the exact second the color drained entirely from his face. The smug, affluent patriarch vanished, replaced by a man staring directly at his own impending destruction. His eyes went wide, and his jaw slackened in profound horror. For a fleeting moment, he looked like he might collapse right there on the polished concrete floor. But the initial panic quickly morphed into something else entirely. The shock ignited into pure, unadulterated rage. His face turned a deep mottled shade of purple, the veins in his neck bulging against the crisp collar of his expensive dress shirt. He slammed his highball glass down onto a nearby cocktail table, completely ignoring the amber liquid that sloshed violently over the rim. He excused himself from his group of associates with a clipped, aggressive wave of his hand and began marching purposefully toward my position. He shoved his way through the dense crowd of partygoers, abandoning all pretense of polite social grace. He shouldered past a group of young women taking selfies, practically knocking one of their ring lights to the floor in his frantic haste to reach me. I did not retreat. I did not shrink back into the shadows of the structural pillar. I stood perfectly still, holding my crystal flute, and waited for him to cross the room. Richard closed the final few feet between us with alarming speed. He invaded my personal space, stopping mere inches from my face. He leaned in so close, I could smell the sharp, stinging odor of expensive bourbon and stale panic radiating off his heavy breath. He did not yell, knowing that a public screaming match would instantly draw the unwanted attention of the surrounding influencers and reporters. Instead, he dropped his voice into a vicious, guttural whisper that vibrated with barely contained fury. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, his eyes darting frantically around the room to see if anyone was watching our tense interaction. "You are not on the guest list. You are not welcome in this building. You need to turn around and walk out those doors this exact second before you ruin Sloane's big night out of pure jealousy. If you do not leave immediately, I am going to have venue security physically drag you out onto the street." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne, completely unfazed. I looked directly into his furious eyes, maintaining absolute eye contact. "Call them right now," I whispered back. "Let us see what happens." Richard's face contorted with a mixture of disbelief and savage satisfaction. He genuinely thought I was bluffing. He assumed my calm demeanor was nothing more than a fragile mask that would instantly shatter the moment actual authority figures got involved. Without breaking eye contact, he raised his right hand high above his head and snapped his fingers sharply. He caught the attention of the two massive security guards stationed near the VIP booth. He gestured aggressively toward the structural pillar, where we stood, his silent command cutting through the loud, pulsing music of the launch party. I watched the guards nod in unison. They immediately abandoned their posts and began pushing their way through the crowded dance floor, their heavy boots thudding against the polished concrete. They were moving with clear intent, their eyes locked directly on my dark silk suit. Richard lowered his hand and crossed his arms over his chest, a sickeningly triumphant grin spreading across his face. "You brought this on yourself," he muttered, his voice dripping with condescension. "You could have just stayed in your lane, Valerie. But you always had to ruin everything. Now you get to experience what it feels like to be publicly discarded." I took another sip of my champagne, letting the cold liquid slide down my throat. I did not move a single muscle to defend myself. I simply watched the guards navigate the sea of influencers, calculating the exact amount of time it would take them to reach us. The commotion had not gone unnoticed by the rest of the family. Sloane, who had been posing flawlessly for a group of professional photographers near the imported flower wall, suddenly caught sight of her father signaling the guards. I saw the flash of confusion cross her meticulously contoured face, followed almost instantly by a predatory spark of recognition. She handed her cocktail to a nearby assistant and practically glided across the room, eager to witness my humiliation firsthand. She wanted a front row seat to my downfall. Sloane arrived at our pillar just seconds before the security personnel. She positioned herself right next to Richard, her posture radiating pure, unadulterated arrogance. "What is she doing here?" Sloane asked loudly, ensuring that several nearby partygoers turned their heads to watch the drama unfold. "I did not invite her. She is trespassing at my event." Richard patted his golden child on the shoulder, playing the role of the protective patriarch to absolute perfection. "Do not worry, sweetheart," he said soothingly. "I am handling it right now. The guards are going to escort her out the back exit so she does not cause a scene and ruin your special night. She is leaving immediately." Sloane looked me up and down, her eyes raking over my tailored suit with blatant disgust. "You really have no shame, Valerie," she sneered, her voice carrying over the ambient noise of the room. "You actually showed up to my brand launch after trying to send our parents to prison. You are completely delusional if you think you can just crash my party and steal my spotlight. This is my night. I earned this partnership. You need to get out of my building before I press charges for harassment." The two security guards finally reached our small circle, their massive frames effectively blocking any potential escape route. The taller guard, a man with a stern expression and a radio earpiece, stepped directly into my personal space. "Mom," the guard said, his voice deep and authoritative, "we have received a complaint from the host family that you are trespassing. I am going to have to ask you to set down your glass and come with us quietly. If you resist, we will be forced to physically remove you from the premises." Richard and Sloane exchanged a look of pure euphoric victory. They had won. They had successfully cornered the scapegoat, and they were about to watch me get thrown onto the street like common trash. They leaned back, waiting for my inevitable panic, waiting for the humiliating surrender they felt I so richly deserved. I did not set down my glass. I did not break my composure. Instead, I shifted my gaze past the towering security guards, past my smug sister, and past my furious father. I looked directly across the expansive room toward the raised VIP booth. Standing near the velvet ropes of the booth was Evelyn Vance, the founder and chief executive officer of Aura Botanicals. She was a brilliant, fiercely independent businesswoman in her late 40s, dressed in a stunning emerald green gown. She had been engaged in a conversation with a local fashion editor, but the sudden movement of the security guards had caught her attention. Her eyes tracked across the room, following the path of the guards, until they landed squarely on our tense confrontation by the pillar. I caught her eye. I offered a very slight, almost imperceptible nod. Evelyn stopped mid-sentence. She politely excused herself from the editor, handed her drink to a passing waiter, and began walking purposefully toward our position. Her stride was brisk and commanding the crowd, parting naturally to let the leader of the cosmetics brand pass through. Richard noticed the shift in my focus. He turned around and saw the chief executive officer approaching. His entire demeanor instantly transformed. The aggressive, bullying patriarch vanished, replaced immediately by a sycophantic, fawning businessman desperate to impress a wealthy connection. He quickly smoothed the lapels of his suit jacket and put on a wide, artificial smile. Sloane mirrored his reaction, standing up incredibly straight and arranging her face into her best camera-ready expression. They both assumed Evelyn was coming over to personally deal with the uninvited guest who was disrupting her brand ambassador's launch party. Evelyn stepped into our small circle. The security guards immediately parted to give her room, recognizing the ultimate authority in the building. Richard extended his hand warmly, stepping forward to intercept her. "Evelyn, it is so wonderful of you to come down here," Richard said, his voice dripping with forced charm. "I apologize profusely for this minor disturbance. This woman managed to slip past the door staff, but my security team is handling the removal as we speak. We will have her out of your venue in a matter of seconds. I assure you, Sloane's celebration will proceed without any further interruptions from this trespasser." Evelyn did not take Richard's extended hand. She did not even look at him. She bypassed my father completely, stepping around his outstretched arm as if he were nothing more than a piece of inconvenient furniture. She walked directly up to me, her face breaking into a massive, genuine smile of pure delight. "Valerie Evelyn," exclaimed, her voice bright and echoing clearly over the pulsating music. "You actually made it. I am so incredibly thrilled that you could join us for the celebration tonight." Evelyn reached out and wrapped her arms around me in a warm, familiar embrace. I hugged her back, setting my champagne glass on a nearby cocktail table. Evelyn turned around to face my stunned family, keeping her arm casually linked through mine. "Trespasser." Evelyn asked, her brow furrowing slightly as she addressed my father. "I am sorry, Richard, but there seems to be a massive misunderstanding here. Why on earth would you ask security to remove the owner of the building? Valerie is the majority shareholder of the venture capital firm that literally acquired my entire brand this morning. She is not a trespasser here tonight. She is the owner." The absolute silence that descended upon our small circle was deafening. Richard stood completely frozen, his outstretched arm dropping awkwardly to his side. The artificial smile he had plastered on for Evelyn melted away, leaving behind wide, terrified eyes. He looked at Evelyn, then at me, struggling to process the reality that had just shattered his night. Sloane mirrored his horror, her face draining of all color. Her arrogant sneer vanished entirely. The two security guards immediately stepped back, relaxing as they realized they had just been ordered to assault the ultimate authority in the room. Evelyn smiled warmly at me, completely unaware of the radioactive tension radiating from my biological family. She assumed the stunned silence was simply a reaction to the corporate acquisition we had finalized that morning. "It has been an absolute whirlwind of a day," Evelyn continued, her voice bright. "When my team received the final acquisition paperwork from your firm, we were absolutely thrilled. We have been looking forward to this partnership, and having you here to celebrate our new ambassador program is the perfect addition to the evening." I kept my eyes locked on my father as I responded to Evelyn. "The pleasure is entirely mine, Evelyn. I have been following the growth of Aura Botanicals for quite some time. You have built an incredible brand with a sterling reputation for integrity and transparency." I finally shifted my gaze to Sloane, who was currently trembling in her designer heels. "Because we value that integrity so highly, I conduct a rigorous secondary forensic audit on any major public-facing asset we acquire. That includes a comprehensive background check on all high-tier brand ambassadors representing our subsidiaries." The ambient noise of the party seemed to swell around us. I raised my hand and signaled to the event manager standing near the audio equipment. I gave him a sharp horizontal cutting motion across my throat. Recognizing Evelyn standing right beside me, the manager scrambled to comply. Within seconds, the heavy club music faded out completely, leaving the cavernous event space in a sudden jarring quiet. Hundreds of heads turned toward the center of the room, seeking the source of the interruption. The cameras, ring lights, and cell phones capturing the party all pivoted directly toward our group. I turned my full attention back to the chief executive officer. My voice was calm, but I projected it clearly enough to carry through the newly quieted room. "Evelyn, after personally reviewing the background check on your new brand ambassador, I am pulling her contract immediately." Evelyn blinked in surprise, her bright smile faltering. "I am sorry, Valerie. You are terminating Sloane. Is there a specific problem with her vetting paperwork?" I did not lower my voice. I wanted every single person in that room to hear the truth. I wanted the influencers recording the event to capture every syllable. "Yes, there is a massive problem. We do not partner with individuals whose lifestyles are funded by embezzled real estate escrow money." A collective audible gasp echoed across the room. The silence that followed was so absolute you could hear the ice shifting in the cocktail glasses. The influencers and press representatives lowered their phones in pure shock before raising them higher to record the unfolding disaster. Flashing camera lights illuminated the devastation on my family's faces. Sloane let out a high, panicked noise that sounded like a wounded animal. "No," she shrieked, her voice echoing wildly off the exposed brick walls. No, that is a lie. That is a complete lie. She is just jealous of me. Evelyn, you cannot listen to her. She is my crazy sister and she is just trying to ruin my life because she hates my parents. I stood my ground watching her manic display of denial. It is not a lie, Sloan. I forwarded the entire encrypted dossier to the federal authorities this morning. The matching routing numbers, the direct wire transfers from innocent clients right into your personal checking account, the fake shell companies your parents set up to hide the theft. I found all of it. The money that paid for your luxury apartment, your designer wardrobe, and the very dress you are wearing was stolen from hardworking families. Richard lunged forward, his face twisted in pure desperation. He reached out to grab my arm, but the security guard instantly stepped between us, shoving my father back with a heavy hand planted firmly on his chest. "Do not touch her," the guard warned, his voice a deep, menacing rumble. "Valerie, you have lost your mind," Richard yelled, spittle flying from his lips as he struggled against the security guard. "You are making up insane stories to destroy my business. Evelyn, this woman is mentally unstable. She has been estranged from our family for years. You cannot possibly believe these insane accusations." Evelyn stepped back, her expression transforming from friendly warmth to sharp corporate self-preservation. She looked at Richard, then at Sloan, and finally at me. "As the majority shareholder, your directives regarding brand representation are absolute, Valerie. If there is even a fraction of a truth to a federal embezzlement investigation or a botanicals cannot be associated with this family." Evelyn turned to her public relations director, who had rushed over. "Call corporate legal right now," Evelyn commanded. "Draft an immediate termination notice for the ambassador contract. Issue a press release distancing our brand from this individual. I want all promotional materials featuring her face taken down before midnight." Sloan collapsed onto her knees right there on the polished concrete floor. The immaculate posture, the smug arrogance, and the carefully curated influencer persona evaporated entirely. She buried her face in her hands and began sobbing hysterically, surrounded by hundreds of cameras capturing her ultimate humiliation. Vivian, who had been standing frozen near the champagne tower, finally rushed over and dropped to the floor beside her golden child, wailing and clutching Sloan in a pathetic display of panic. The carefully curated public facade they had spent 5 years funding with stolen money shattered into a million pieces in real time. The social circle they had manipulated to attack me was now bearing witness to their criminal reality. I looked down at the two weeping women on the floor, then over to my father, who was still being restrained by security. He looked utterly defeated, a hollow shell of the arrogant man who had tried to throw me out moments ago. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse whatsoever. I felt only the clean edge of absolute justice. I turned to Evelyn and offered a polite professional nod. "I apologize for the dramatic restructuring of your launch party, Evelyn. I will have my legal team forward the relevant documentation to your office in the morning so you can protect the company assets. Have a wonderful evening." Without waiting for a single response, I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit. The crowd of stunned influencers parted instantly, clearing a wide path for me to the heavy glass doors. I walked out into the cool, refreshing night air, leaving my family trapped in the flashing ruins of their own creation. The drive back to my penthouse was remarkably quiet. I slept deeply and woke up at dawn feeling completely refreshed. I went through my morning routine with precision, pouring a cup of dark roast coffee and reviewing the early market reports. I arrived at my corporate office just before 8, the glass and steel skyscraper offering a commanding view of the city waking up below. I sat behind my expansive desk and opened a secure news terminal. I did not have to wait long for the inevitable fallout. By 9 in the morning, the local news networks were broadcasting live footage from the suburban commercial district where my parents operated their boutique real estate brokerage. The flashing red and blue lights of federal law enforcement vehicles illuminated the sleek glass facade of their office building. Agents in dark jackets bearing the letters of federal agencies were actively hauling out heavy cardboard boxes filled with physical files and confiscated computer towers. The encrypted dossier I had anonymously forwarded to the Securities and Exchange Commission had triggered an immediate, devastating tactical response. The authorities were locking down the premises, securing the crime scene before any more evidence could be destroyed or hidden. I watched the silent video feed on my monitor, sipping my coffee, as a news anchor described the sudden raid. They reported that a multi-agency task force was executing search warrants related to massive financial irregularities and suspected wire fraud. The sheer speed of the federal mobilization confirmed just how damning my forensic evidence had been. The authorities did not just suspect embezzlement. They had the exact routing numbers, the dates, and the destination accounts handed to them on a silver platter. I closed the news tab, feeling a profound sense of closure. The long overdue consequences were finally crashing down on the people who believed they were entirely untouchable. I turned my attention to a quarterly earnings report, fully intending to spend the rest of my morning completely immersed in my actual job. But less than an hour later, my desk phone buzzed with an urgent tone. It was the head of security for my building, a retired military officer who rarely sounded flustered. He informed me that my parents were currently standing in the ground floor lobby. They had bypassed the standard visitor protocols and were frantically demanding to see me right now. The security director told me they were causing a significant disturbance, weeping and pleading with the reception staff. He asked if I wanted them escorted off the property, or if he should contact the local police to have them officially removed for trespassing. I leaned back in my leather chair, contemplating the situation. I knew exactly why they were here. The federal agents had likely frozen every single remaining asset and locked them out of their own commercial suite. They had nowhere else to run. The illusion of their immense wealth had been stripped away in front of the entire neighborhood, leaving them entirely exposed. I could have sent them away and let them face the legal system entirely on their own. But I wanted to see them. I wanted to witness the exact moment they realized that the daughter they had discarded was their absolute last resort. I instructed my security director to issue them a temporary visitor pass and escort them directly up to my executive suite. I wanted them to walk through the heavy glass doors of my company and see the empire I had built without a single ounce of their support or love. I stood up and straightened my tailored jacket, moving to stand in the center of my spacious office. The heavy mahogany doors swung open a few minutes later, guided by two of my uniformed security personnel. Richard and Vivian stumbled into the room. The transformation they had undergone since the launch party just hours ago was absolutely staggering. They looked like they had aged a decade overnight. My father was wearing a rumpled, ill-fitting sweater, his face pale and covered in a sheen of cold sweat. The arrogant posture he always maintained was completely gone, replaced by a defensive, terrified slouch. My mother was in even worse condition. She was wearing sunglasses indoors to hide her swollen red eyes, her hair completely unstyled and tangled. She was clutching her designer handbag against her chest, as if it were a life preserver in a violently stormy ocean. The security guard stepped back, closing the heavy wooden doors and leaving us entirely alone in the quiet, climate-controlled office. My parents stood frozen near the entryway, staring at the expensive artwork on my walls, the massive mahogany desk, and the panoramic view of the bustling city skyline behind me. They looked completely overwhelmed by the sheer scale of my corporate environment. For years, they had convinced themselves that I was just a low-level employee scraping by in the city. Confronting the physical reality of my immense success clearly shattered whatever remaining delusions they held on to. I did not offer them a seat. I did not offer them coffee or water. I simply stood there with my hands clasped together, waiting for them to speak. My father took a hesitant step forward, his hands shaking noticeably at his sides. "Valerie," he croaked, his voice cracking with a raw, uncharacteristic vulnerability. "The federal agents raided the brokerage this morning. They broke down the glass doors. They seized our servers, our filing cabinets, and all of our personal electronics. They told us we are under active investigation for severe financial crimes. They completely froze the remaining operating accounts and placed a lien on the house. We have absolutely nothing left. We cannot even hire a defense attorney. We are completely ruined. He stopped talking and swallowed hard tears pooling in the corners of his eyes as the magnitude of his reality completely set in. My mother suddenly moved forward, bypassing my father entirely. To my absolute astonishment, Vivian did not just walk toward me. She dropped her heavy handbag onto the pristine carpet and let her knees buckle. She collapsed onto the floor of my executive office, weeping openly and shamelessly at my feet. My father immediately followed suit, dropping down right next to her. The two people who had spent my entire life looking down their noses at me were now literally kneeling on my office floor, gazing up at me with expressions of pure, unadulterated desperation. "Valerie, please." Vivian sobbed, reaching out as if to grab the hem of my trousers. I took a deliberate step backward, keeping myself entirely out of her reach. "You have to find it in your heart to help us. You are the only person in the world who has the kind of capital we need right now. We are begging you for a massive bailout loan to replace the stolen escrow money before formal indictments are handed down. If you just do this one thing for us, we swear to you that we promise everything will change. We will finally treat you like a real daughter. Please save us from this horrible nightmare. We will do anything you ask of us." I looked down at the two figures groveling on my custom rug. The sheer audacity of their promise hung in the quiet air of my office. They promised to treat me like a real daughter. They honestly believed that dangling a normal, healthy familial relationship like a transactional reward would suddenly erase a lifetime of calculated cruelty and financial exploitation. I did not feel a flicker of sympathy. I felt only the chilling validation that I had made the absolute right choice in burning this bridge. I stepped around their kneeling forms, walking deliberately behind my massive mahogany desk. I did not tell them to stand up. I opened the heavy top drawer and retrieved a thick black portfolio folder. I dropped it onto the polished wood surface. The sharp slap of the heavy folder echoed in the expansive room, making both my father and mother flinch. I slowly opened the cover and extracted a stack of high-resolution printouts. These were the exact banking ledgers, the highlighted routing numbers, and the corresponding photographs of Sloane enjoying her stolen luxury vacations. I slid the documents across the smooth surface of the desk. The glossy papers fanned out, stopping just inches from the edge where Richard and Vivian remained on the floor. "Take a very close look at those papers," I instructed, my voice ringing with absolute clinical precision. "I am not a bank manager you can charm. I am not a gullible client you can manipulate. I am a forensic cybersecurity expert. I know exactly how deep the rot goes. I traced every single dollar you illegally siphoned from those escrow accounts directly into the personal checking account of your favorite daughter over the last 5 years. I know about the shell companies you registered to hide your tracks. I know about the delinquent tax notices and the commercial eviction warnings. You are not experiencing a temporary cash flow problem. You are running a massive illegal Ponzi scheme that has completely collapsed." My father reached up with trembling fingers and pulled the top sheet of paper toward him. His eyes scanned the detailed transaction logs. The remaining color drained completely from his face as he recognized the exact dates and amounts of his criminal transfers. Vivian let out a soft, terrified whimper, covering her mouth with her hands as she realized the absolute impossibility of denying the evidence spread out before them. The facade was permanently shattered. "You are asking me for a bailout," I continued, my tone dropping into a deadly, uncompromising calm. "You are begging me to hand over millions of dollars to cover up a federal crime so you can avoid the consequences of funding a fake lifestyle. You want me to buy your freedom? The answer is no. I will not give you a single cent. I will not authorize a loan. I will not help you hire a defense attorney. I am leaving you entirely to the mercy of the federal justice system." My mother let out a loud, agonizing wail. She scrambled up from the floor, clutching the edge of my desk as if it were the only thing keeping her standing. "Valerie, you cannot do this. You are signing our death warrants. If we do not replace that money by tomorrow, The authorities will formally indict us. We will lose everything. We will go to federal prison. You cannot send your own flesh and blood to prison. I am not sending you anywhere, I replied smoothly. Your own greed secured your indictments. But since you brought it up, I should inform you of one additional detail regarding my involvement in your upcoming legal battles. I am not just refusing to finance your criminal defense. I have officially agreed to serve as an expert forensic witness for the federal prosecution. The silence in the room became absolute. The air grew thick and unbreathable. I will be taking the stand under oath, I stated clearly, letting every word sink into their panicked minds. I will be walking the jury through the exact digital trail of the embezzled funds. I will be testifying about the fraudulent car loan, the forged signature, and the deployment of my outdated Social Security information. I will use my professional expertise to ensure the prosecution understands the precise mechanics of your theft. I am going to help them lock you away. The total reality of my statement hit them like a physical shockwave. The desperation that had fueled their groveling instantly vanished, replaced by sheer animalistic panic. The united front they had maintained for decades dissolved in a matter of seconds. Richard spun around and pointed a trembling finger directly at my mother's face. "This is your fault," he screamed, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. "You were the one who insisted on buying that stupid car. I told you we did not have the liquid capital to cover the financing. I told you pulling her old Social Security numbers was too risky, but you just had to spoil Sloan for her birthday. You brought this entire federal investigation down on us because you could not tell your spoiled daughter no." Vivian shrieked, batting his hand away with absolute fury. "Do not you dare pin this entirely on me. You were the one shuffling the escrow funds through those shell companies for years. You were the managing broker signing off on the fraudulent closing documents. You loved the money just as much as she did. You loved walking into the country club acting like a real estate mogul while you were secretly robbing innocent families blind to pay for your expensive bourbon and custom suits. I watched them tear each other apart right in the middle of my office. They screamed, assigning blame, hurling vicious insults, and desperately trying to throw one another under the proverbial bus to save their own skin. The loyalty they claimed was the bedrock of our family was nothing but a fragile illusion built on shared guilt and stolen money. The moment the consequences became real, they turned on each other with the ferocity of starved wolves. I stood behind my desk, completely silent, observing the pathetic destruction of the people who had tormented me for my entire life. Their shouting match escalated, their voices echoing harshly against the pristine glass windows of my suite. My mother accused my father of gross incompetence, screeching that he had ruined her life and destroyed their social standing. My father retaliated by calling her a shallow, manipulative parasite who had driven their business straight into the ground. It was a spectacular, ugly display of cowardice. I simply watched the carnage unfold, my posture relaxed, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, satisfying vindication. The toxic foundation of their marriage was finally imploding under the harsh light of the truth. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors of my office flew open, slamming violently against the interior walls. The shouting between my parents abruptly stopped. I looked past their frozen forms to see Sloane standing in the doorway. She was breathing heavily, her face flushed and her eyes darting frantically around the room. Two of my security guards were right behind her, looking apologetic for the intrusion. Sloane had clearly pushed her way past the reception desk in a state of absolute frenzy. Sloane marched into the center of the office, completely ignoring the security personnel. She looked at our parents, taking in their disheveled appearances and the scattered forensic documents lying on my desk. Her luxury influencer persona had completely evaporated. She looked exactly like what she was, a panicked, broke woman facing the immediate collapse of her entire world. The news of the federal raid had obviously reached her, and the reality of her newfound poverty was clearly setting in. "Mom! Dad, what is happening?" Sloane demanded, her voice shrill and trembling. "The bank just called me. The authorities froze my personal checking accounts. My credit cards are declining everywhere. My landlord slipped an eviction warning under my door because my automatic rent payment bounced this morning. You told me everything was fine. You promised me the cosmetic brand termination was just a temporary setback. I have absolutely no money to my name. You have to fix this right now. Vivian reached out toward Sloane, her face crumpling into a fresh wave of hysterical tears. Oh, my sweet girl. Vivian sobbed. We have nothing left. The federal agents took everything. The business is gone. The house is heavily leveraged. We came here to beg your sister for a bailout loan, but she refuses to help us. She is going to testify against us in federal court. She is trying to send your father and me to prison. Sloane stared at my mother, her eyes wide with mounting terror. She looked down at the financial documents spread across my desk, processing the severity of the situation. The realization hit her with visible force. Her parents were not going to rescue her. There was no secret cache of money waiting to save her luxury lifestyle. They were heading to a federal penitentiary, and she was going to be left entirely destitute on the street. I watched Sloane's expression shift from panic to cold, calculating survival instinct. The transformation was swift and ruthless. She did not run to comfort her weeping mother. She did not offer a single word of support to her terrified father. Instead, she turned her back on them completely and walked directly toward my desk. She placed her hands on the polished wood and leaned forward, looking me straight in the eyes. Valerie Sloane said, her voice dropping the frantic pitch and adopting a tone of desperate negotiation. You have all the proof. You know exactly what they did. I did not forge any signatures. I did not move any money through shell companies. I just spent what they gave me. I had no idea it was stolen from escrow accounts. I am a victim in this too. Vivian gasped loudly from her spot on the floor. Sloane, how can you say that? We stole that money for you. We risked everything to give you the life you wanted. Sloane did not even glance over her shoulder. She kept her eyes locked entirely on me. I will testify against them. She offered, the words tumbling out of her mouth with chilling speed. I will be a cooperating witness for the prosecution. I will tell the federal agents everything I know about their spending habits and their lies. I will hand over every single bank statement and text message proving they orchestrated the entire embezzlement scheme. I will help you lock them away for a very long time. My father let out a strangled, horrified noise. Sloane, you are our daughter. We did this for your happiness. I do not care, Sloane snapped, finally looking back at them with pure disgust. You ruined my life. You made me look like a criminal in front of my entire following. I lost my brand deals because of your stupidity. She turned back to me, her eyes pleading. I will give the prosecution whatever they want, Valerie. I just need one thing from you in return. You have to give me a job at your tech firm, a high-paying executive position. I need a salary that can sustain my lifestyle, and I need your corporate protection. If you guarantee me a job, I will destroy them in court. The sheer, unadulterated lack of loyalty in the room was astounding. In less than 20 minutes, my entire biological family had completely turned on one another, willing to trade their own flesh and blood for a sliver of self-preservation or a steady paycheck. The toxic foundation they had built their lives upon was fully exposed, rotting under the harsh light of accountability. I looked at Sloane, taking in her desperate bargaining expression. I looked at Richard and Vivian, staring at their favorite daughter with expressions of absolute devastation. I could not hold it in any longer. I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. The sound echoed through the quiet office, startling all three of them. I laughed at the absurdity of their entitlement. I laughed at the spectacular collapse of their manufactured reality. You truly are incredible, Sloane, I said, shaking my head slowly. You honestly believe you are in a position to negotiate a high-paying executive role at my company. You have absolutely no skills, no work ethic, and no concept of reality. I do not need your testimony. The prosecution does not need your cooperation. The digital forensic evidence I provided is entirely sufficient to secure their convictions. You bring absolutely nothing of value to this table. I stood up straight, projecting absolute authority over the room. I looked at the three broken, pathetic individuals standing in my office. You three deserve exactly what you are about to get. Each other. You built a life entirely on lies, theft, and cruelty. Now you get to experience the consequences together. I raised my hand and signaled to the two security guards waiting near the doorway. Escort them out of the building, I commanded smoothly. If they attempt to return to this property, contact local law enforcement and press trespassing charges immediately. The guards stepped forward without hesitation, grabbing Richard and Vivian by their arms and hauling them toward the heavy mahogany doors. Sloane tried to protest, opening her mouth to hurl another desperate negotiation, but a guard firmly guided her out alongside her weeping parents. They were ushered out of my office, their voices fading down the hallway as the heavy doors swung shut with a resounding click. The sudden silence in the room was beautiful. The following months played out exactly as the forensic data predicted. Richard and Vivian were indicted on multiple counts of federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. Their trial was swift, concluding with lengthy prison sentences that ensured they would spend their twilight years behind bars. Their remaining assets were liquidated to pay restitution to the innocent families they had robbed. Sloane, devoid of any actual skills and carrying a permanently ruined public reputation, was forced to vacate her luxury apartment. With no other options, she took a minimum-wage retail job, spending her days folding clothes and complaining bitterly to coworkers who cared absolutely nothing about her former status as a lifestyle influencer. A year later, I sat in my Chicago penthouse. The city skyline sparkled outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm, ambient glow across the spacious living room. It was exactly 11:45 at night. It was my 34th birthday, but this time the room was not silent. My penthouse was filled with laughter music and the clinking of crystal glasses. My business partners were telling a ridiculous story near the kitchen island. My close friends were gathered on the plush leather sofas sharing a massive custom birthday cake. My supportive, loving partner stood beside me, wrapping a warm arm around my waist and pressing a gentle kiss to my temple. I held a glass of expensive red wine, looking around at the incredible, loyal family I had chosen and built for myself. My phone buzzed softly in my pocket. I did not even bother checking the screen. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, feeling an overwhelming sense of profound peace. The toxic ghosts of my past were entirely gone, and I was finally beautifully free. Valerie's journey teaches us a profound and difficult truth shared. DNA does not automatically entitle anyone to your peace, your resources, or your future. For years, she was trapped in a toxic ecosystem where her worth was constantly diminished to elevate her sister, the golden child. Her parents didn't just fail to support her. They actively bet against her, eventually resorting to federal identity theft to maintain a hollow materialistic facade. The core lesson here is that true freedom requires absolute, uncompromising boundaries. Society often conditions us to believe that family must be accommodated at all costs, but this story shatters that myth. When a relationship is built entirely on exploitation, manipulation, and conditional approval, walking away isn't an act of cruelty, it is an act of fundamental self-preservation. Furthermore, the narrative highlights the vital importance of independence. By building her own success and relying on her unique skills, Valerie created an impenetrable safety net that shielded her from their control. By refusing to be the family's financial savior or their emotional scapegoat, she successfully broke a cycle of abuse. She proved that you do not owe your hard-earned success to the people who refused to believe in you when you had nothing. Ultimately, the most beautiful life you can build is one surrounded by a chosen family, individuals who respect your boundaries, celebrate your genuine achievements, and love you for exactly who you are without any hidden agendas. Have you ever had to draw a hard line and walk away from family members who only saw you as an asset to exploit? How did you find the courage to finally choose your own peace? Share your stories of survival and building your chosen family in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your power. Remember, walking away from toxicity isn't quitting, it's winning.